Hello, this is Gary Woodman. I'm Chief Executive of the Worcestershire Local Enterprise Partnership, and today we're doing our Making Connections podcast with Robin Walker MP. Morning, Robin.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So as part of this, we went to a number of our businesses who were asking to put questions forward to our local MPs, and therefore I've got a number of those questions that they proposed. So I think we'll kick off in a sense. First question was, how do you think Worcestershire NHS has been able to cope with the COVID-19 cases? And then how can the community continue to support them during this time?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that they have done an incredible job at supporting people who have come down with this awful illness and at making sure that they've got the capacity to deal with that. And one of the things we were all very worried about at the beginning of this process was the unknown number of people who would get infected, who would need help and support in hospitals, and the fact that our hospitals were already full. And so, it has been a huge superhuman effort by the NHS to make sure that they created space, created capacity to address this. And actually, because of the steps that the public have taken, and businesses and the public have taken to make people safer, to keep people away from one another, to allow for social distancing, and to allow more people to work from home, the pressure on the NHS has been less than we feared it might be. As a result of that, we have consistently had more beds available than have been needed. We've consistently had extra capacity in Worcestershire, and we haven't had to use the emergency Nightingale hospitals, which were set up regionally. And of course, we had access to one in Birmingham, which fortunately we haven't had to use. So the NHS has done a phenomenal job, and certainly what I've heard from constituents who have been in for treatment, either for coronavirus or for other things, is that actually the treatment and support that they've had from the NHS has been fantastic. That has been enabled by the wider societal response to the virus, and the fact that people have generally obeyed the rules and done the right thing. And businesses have a huge part to play in that. Businesses allowing their staff time off when they need it to self-isolate, to be away, putting in place where possible for measures for people to work from home, and allowing people to work where they do have to come into work in a safe, socially distanced environment. All of those things are absolutely crucial to making sure the NHS can continue to manage and can manage even better as we head into the recovery phase.
Okay, and certainly on previous episodes of the Making Connections podcast, we sort of discussed this kind of new working environment that many people are finding themselves in, whether they're working from home or whether they're in the factory or anywhere else. And do we see this becoming the sort of new norm for businesses as we go forward over the next?
Well, I think we've all learned some things from this process, and I think a lot of businesses, particularly in the services space, will have learned that where workers can be just as productive a lot of the time working remotely and working from home. And that has been something I know which has come as a surprise to some, but in many ways could be a good thing, and a good thing for the future of our economy. Who are in the manufacturing space, it's much more difficult to see how people can work from home. You do need to get people back in. But of course, some of the things that we have learned to do with regard to social distancing, with regard to sensible spacing out of these things, will probably have useful benefits to the long term. I understand there will be many businesses, particularly in retail, the tourism, hospitality sector, they just want to get back to normal as soon as possible. But I think we can all learn things from this process, and making sure that people have the tools to be as productive as possible, even when they do have to work from home, is definitely one of them.
Yeah, and there's definitely a feel that businesses are starting to operate differently, and maybe we won't go back to the 1st of March 2020 in the way that business works, but certainly business does adapt. And certainly our manufacturers, when we did our manufacturing podcast, they were very much talking about how they brought that working from home team, their shop floor team together. But I think the challenge probably is those people who are vulnerable at the moment, who are having to self-isolate and forced to self-isolate. How do you think sort of government can kind of support those measures to bring those people gradually back into the workforce?
I mean, I think this is a really good point, because particularly as we roll out the track and trace program, there are going to be more people who are going to be told to self-isolate for a period of time, because instead of asking the whole of society to lock down, we're going to be taking a more targeted approach. Now, there is some advice on the gov.uk website for different types of businesses as to how to protect employees, and also from Public Health England about how to protect employees who are particularly vulnerable and that side of things. The other service which is available for businesses, and which actually I've been pointing a few people towards during this process, is ACAS has a free helpline and can provide some useful targeted support for businesses where they have these issues. For the government's part, we're going to step up statutory sick pay and the availability of that for all those people who are asked to self-isolate under the track and trace programme. And I think it's really important that we do put the right measures in place to support individuals and employees who need to shelter to do so, because it's actually in the interests of all of us and in the interests of businesses for all their other staff, but where people need to spend some time away from work, they're supported to do so in order to reduce the overall rates of infection. Okay, I mean, that's really helpful. And I think a number of businesses I've been speaking to, and I think have come through your postbag as well, around, I see that as a real kind of challenge of how they gradually bring that workforce back as things pick up. I mean, obviously the impact of COVID-19 on the visitor economy in Worcestershire was also something that our business community came back to us with. Looking at international tourism is probably 12 to 18 months away. So they're really grateful for the furlough scheme, but is government willing to go further in terms of supporting the kind of national time out and raising the bar initiatives? Well, I think the tourism and hospitality sector has been hit hardest of all in this period, just being completely shut down for such a long period. So I think it's been absolutely right to step in to support it, both through the business rate scheme and through furlough. But I think we do need to see how we can support the recovery as well. And I've had a number of businesses write to me about the Time Out campaign. That's something I've raised with colleagues at DCMS and the Treasury, and certainly keen that they take a good look at those. I also think that we need to have a massive push at promoting domestic UK tourism. And one of the things I'm pushing within government is to make sure that, as unfortunately many people are having to cancel international holidays over the summer, we take the opportunity to really promote UK destinations. I think Worcestershire should absolutely be part of that. We've got a great offer and we should make sure that we are selling that offer to people all over the UK who may not be able to go away and leave the country, but may well by then be able to come and visit local attractions and support local hotels, restaurants, businesses. So that's something I'm very keen that we have a real push behind that. And I want to make sure that the government leans into that.
Yeah, no, definitely that's the sector that I think how it comes back is, I think everyone's wrestling with at the moment. With then news that our sort of retail shops will be perhaps reopening from mid-June, how do you think the high streets across the county will fare, and what should they be doing in preparation?
Well, I think having that information and knowing the date is really important, because it means that people can prepare their plans. They can set out how they're going to be able to deliver socially distanced shopping and make sure that they can protect their customers and make them feel safe. I think making sure that people are assured that they're shopping in a safe environment is going to be absolutely crucial to building the public confidence that gets people out and using the shops again. So this is something which, again, I think is in our shared interest, but it's also in the interest of those shops and retail environments. We've got some really good high streets, and I'm very proud of Worcester's high street and city centre, the way that it's really outperformed over the last few years. But there's no doubt this is a massive challenge, and that's why I think it's important that some of the schemes, such as the business rates support, will go for longer than perhaps the immediate crisis. I recognise that shops are going to need help, that they're going to need a bit of time to sort out things like their VAT and that side of things. So I'm pushing for government to take a generous approach to make sure that the sector can really bounce back and that we have strong high streets for decades to come, not just in the immediate aftermath of this. Yeah,
I mean, certainly the high street, I think probably this has accelerated the challenges on the high street, but also where there are challenges, there are definitely opportunities. And I think those creative entrepreneurs hopefully can kind of come in and keep that high street vibrant. State aid, this is a question from Bishop Fleming. State aid rules have been sort of the Achilles heel really over a period of time. and notably companies classed as undertaking in difficulty are unable to access C-bills. So, and obviously those companies that kind of need to access C-bills are going to be in difficulty anyway. What do you think, kind of given the fact that we're exiting the EU, the government challenge the rules at this time and maybe just bring a bit more vital funding and support to those companies to get them over this period?
Well, I know this is an issue that Bishop Fleming have raised with me directly, and I've taken up with Treasury colleagues. I would like to come up with a simple solution, and it's very tempting to simply say we could sort of swipe out an area of the rules and everything would work perfectly. Unfortunately, it never is that simple. And but part of the challenge is that if we were to unilaterally move away from that, as indeed, yes, we will have the power to do at the end of the transition period. But if we were to do that, then the EU would be likely to impose some kind of penalty, some kind of tariff or other barrier for our businesses as a recompense. So it's important we do this in a coordinated way. And I think whatever we do on new state aid rules, we will need to make sure has buy-in and understanding from our international trading partners. So I recognise the issue, I have raised it, and I think there's particular issues with companies that are supported by private equity as well with regard to some of their structures and making sure that those are recognised by the schemes. I think it's also important that the government has learned from some of the difficulties in the early days with the C-bill scheme and actually corrected those with the bounce back loans. And I know for a lot of smaller businesses, those have provided a much more readily available source of finance where C-bills were perhaps too complicated.
Okay, and certainly then around official announcements where some selected year groups in schools are coming back in June as well, what do you think the benefits of returning just those year groups are? And then how do you think that might impact the wider economy? Was a question that came through Harrison Clark Rickaby.
Yeah, I mean, I recognise this is a huge challenge, and many parents and many employers would probably much rather all schools were able to return with the full number of pupils and therefore relieve more people of childcare duties. The reality is, though, that we have to be careful, we have to be cautious about the way people return to school. We have to make sure that schools can provide proper social distancing. And that does mean that only a portion of the cohort in schools can return in the first instance. What we want to ensure is that those pupils who are at a key moment of transition, so entering school for the first time, or transitioning from primary to secondary, and those pupils who have really important exams like GCSEs or A-levels next year are those who are prioritised. And that's the reason why specific year groups have been identified for the first tranche of people returning to school. I think the opportunity will be, if that can be proven to be done safely, if we can show that the R rate doesn't increase with those, then we can gradually build back up to full capacity in schools. But this isn't something that can safely happen overnight. And you'll recognise, I think, that the teaching unions and many people in the teaching profession are concerned about doing this too quickly. So we need to get it right. We need to get it right first time. And that's why I think a cautious safety first approach is being taken to build up the number of people in schools and to ensure that we can do that with safe social distancing in place. The other point I'd make is that we are not making it compulsory, even within those year groups, for pupils to attend. And where parents have concerns, where perhaps someone in the family is still isolating, or where they simply may not want their child going to school, they have the right to withhold that. So we're not even going to be talking about the whole of those year groups when this happens. We will be talking about a reasonable portion, I suspect, who will choose to stay away until at least next term.
Hewitt Recruitment came in saying employers still need a skilled workforce and will need different skills for the sort of foreseeable future, kind of in the changing dynamic. How will government kind of lead this focus on developing new distinct skills?
I think that's a very interesting point, actually. And I think there is a huge shift in the dynamic in terms of people obviously needing more remote working skills, more of that. There's also certain sectors, like the agricultural sector, who have a desperate need for people in the short term. To fill a gap from people who usually come from overseas. And so the government needs to support those, and it needs to support both the recruitment schemes, as it has, and I know DEFRA has launched specific recruitment on that front, but also to support the skills needs of the sectors. I'd like to see digital apprenticeships and steps like that to support people to develop their digital skills, which are going to be particularly useful in this environment. But clearly this needs to be part of the overall recovery plan. And I know that that's something that every government department has been tasked on working on and delivering.
Okay. And finally, in your sort of Minister for State for Northern Ireland, what are your thoughts on Northern Ireland continuing the adoption of stay at home rather than the message of stay alert?
I think, look, every part of the UK has the right to choose its messaging. And actually, I think the way in which this has rolled out, if you look at the detail of Northern Ireland's 5-step plan, it's actually remarkably similar to the overall UK approach and the approach we have in England. Clearly, there was a bit of a political row, particularly with Nicola Sturgeon, around the step from going from the stay-at-home message to the stay-alert message. But I think the businesses will recognise that actually what we are facing is more complex than any one simple message. It is about how do we return our economy, how do we make sure we can get back to a full functioning economy whilst also continuing to control and manage this disease. And I think in that environment, the stay alert message is an appropriate one. I think what I'm seeing on the ground in Northern Ireland is that they're actually following the same approach and having the same staged approach to returning people to schools, returning people to workplaces as the UK in general is. But if they choose to do that with slightly different messaging, that's fine by me. I'm not going to have a big row about that.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And we look forward to the Prime Minister's statement on Sunday, I think, is when we might see a bit more of how the COVID and the lockdown and how the easing of those restrictions kind of come through. I mean, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And can I just say a huge thank you to all the businesses in Worcestershire that have done a brilliant job of supporting people through this, because I know it hasn't been easy. I know that business people have been faced with unprecedented decisions and unprecedented pressure, all while having to take the same decisions to support their families as the rest of us through this. So I just want to say a huge thank you for all the work that's been done on this front and all the work that you at WLEP are doing to support people through this.
No, thank you very much. I know that over the remaining sort of few months, we'll continue to bring issues to not just your door, but to the 6 Worcestershire MPs to make sure that our businesses are getting their concerns heard right at the heart of Whitehall and Westminster. And certainly you've done well, as you've had a little person in the background who's also been making plans.
Yeah, so apologies for the background noise. That is one of the perils of the working from home environment.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Good.